The year 2000. The city of Shah Alam, Malaysia, a place usually buzzing with the quiet energy of university life, became the stage for an event that would freeze the blood of an entire community. This was no movie script, no campfire tale told for cheap thrills. It was a waking nightmare, a chilling reality whose witnesses are alive to this day. Even now, decades later, the mere mention of that time makes people shudder, their voices dropping to hushed, fearful whispers. At the heart of it was University Technology Mara, better known as UITM. A new academic session had just begun, and the sprawling campus was a hive of activity. Students from every corner of Malaysia, from the bustling streets of Kuala Lumpur to the quiet villages of Sabah and Sarawak, were arriving, clutching acceptance letters and dreams of the future. The university hostels, old and new, were overflowing. Every single room was taken, and desperate students were forced to look elsewhere. But Shah Alam was not a cheap town. The rent for even a small, cramped room, a space barely large enough for a bed and a study table, was nearly 400 ringgit a month. For a student living on a tight allowance, it was a small fortune. Into this chaotic search arrived a young man named John. He was about 21 years old, bright-eyed, and eager to start his new life. Unable to find a spot in the hostels, he teamed up with a few acquaintances he had just made during the orientation week. Together, they were a group of 8 young men, all in the same boat, desperate for an affordable place to stay. They spent days scouring the neighborhoods near the university. They saw dingy rooms, shared apartments with rude landlords, and places so dilapidated they seemed ready to collapse. Every single one was either too expensive or too miserable. Hope was beginning to fade. Then one afternoon they stumbled upon something peculiar. Tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street not far from the university gates, stood a large, colonial-era bungalow. It was grand, with high ceilings, shuttered windows, and a sprawling, overgrown garden. What struck them as odd was its condition. It was completely empty. Dust lay thick on the window panes. The garden was a jungle of weeds. It looked like no one had lived there for years. Curiosity piqued, they managed to find a contact number for the owner. When John called, the owner's voice was calm, almost indifferent. Then came the offer that would seal their fate. "You can have the whole bungalow," the owner said. "The rent is 50 ringgit a month." Silence fell over the group as John relayed the message. 50 ringgit? For an entire house? Just a few days ago, they were looking at a closet-sized room for 400. This was almost too good to be true. It was too good to be true. But they were young, and the lure of independence and an almost unimaginable bargain was intoxicating. The voice of caution was drowned out by the cheering of their friends. John, thrilled, agreed on the spot. The owner said he would draw up a simple agreement. Then he added an unexpected sweetener. "The first month is free," he said. "Just give me a security deposit of 50 ringgit. That's all." As they were finalizing the details, the owner added a strange, final piece of advice. His tone was still flat, but the words were peculiar. "Don't bring too many belongings with you," he said. "It will be difficult to take them back later." The boys exchanged glances but shrugged it off. A strange thing for a landlord to say, they thought. Maybe he just didn't like clutter. They were too excited to give it another thought. That very evening they moved in. The bungalow was even bigger than they had imagined. A large living room, a dusty dining hall, a creaky kitchen, and 4 large bedrooms upstairs. As they explored their new home, they noticed 2 particularly unsettling features. Right next to the house, almost touching its eastern wall, stood an enormous, ancient tree. Its thick, gnarled branches reached out like skeletal fingers, scraping against the upstairs window panes. The locals called this tree the Pokok Gara. In Malay folklore, it was a tree associated with the spirit world. It was believed that if a branch of a Pokok Gara touched a house, it acted as a bridge, allowing dark, wandering spirits to easily slip inside. Behind the house, in the middle of the overgrown backyard, was another strange feature, a small, unnatural-looking mound of earth. It was about 3 feet high and perfectly rounded, as if someone had dug a deep hole, buried something large, and then carefully covered it back up. It looked utterly out of place. That first night, everything was normal. Blissfully, deceptively normal. The 8 boys, delirious with their good fortune, raided a nearby convenience store for snacks and drinks. They stayed up late, watching action movies on a small portable TV, laughing, joking, and enjoying their newfound freedom. The strange tree, the eerie mound, the landlord's odd warning, all of it was forgotten in the warm glow of friendship and cheap rent. They fell asleep, scattered across mattresses and sofas as the clock ticked past midnight. The terror began the next morning. Azmi was the first to wake up. He shuffled downstairs, still half asleep, heading for the common bathroom. He reached for the doorknob and turned it. It was locked. Frowning, he pressed his ear to the door. He could hear the distinct sound of water splashing and the heavy whoosh of the toilet flushing. Probably one of the guys, he thought, yawning. He waited. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The water sounds continued, but no one came out. He knocked. No answer. He pounded on the door. The sound stopped, but the door remained shut. Frustrated, he went upstairs to wake the others. "Hey, which one of you is in the bathroom?" he asked. One by one they all mumbled, shaking their heads. Everyone was in the room. A cold ripple of unease passed through the group. They all trooped back downstairs and stood before the locked door. "Who's in there?" John shouted. Nothing but a deep, profound silence. Then someone had a terrible idea. "Let's count ourselves," he whispered. They did. 1, 2, 3, 8. They counted again. 8 heads. 8 scared, pale faces. 8. If all 8 of them were standing in the hallway, then who was inside the bathroom? The air grew thick. They could feel a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature. Summoning their courage, they took a run at the old wooden door and slammed into it. On the third try, it burst open. The bathroom was completely, utterly empty. The tiles were dry. The toilet was silent. But the sound of the flush was still echoing in their ears. It had been real. They had all heard it. Azmi turned as white as a sheet. He swore on that spot that he would never, ever use that bathroom again. He'd rather run to the gas station down the road. The others laughed nervously, but the laughter was hollow, shaky. That very same night, something happened to John. He was in his room, fast asleep on a mattress on the floor. His roommate, Len, was snoring softly in the bunk above him. In the dead of night, John's eyes flew open. He felt a pair of hands, cold, hard, and impossibly strong, wrap around his ankles. Before he could even scream, he was yanked with brutal force off the mattress. His head cracked against the hard concrete floor, and pain exploded behind his eyes. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering. "Len, you idiot. That's not funny," he shouted, rubbing his head. He looked up at the top bunk. Len was lying perfectly still, his back to John, the blanket pulled up to his ears. He was sound asleep. Furious and shaken, John stormed out of the room to find Len downstairs. He thundered down the steps and into the living room, and froze. The entire group, Azmi, Vak, Babu, Naim, Salah, and Wak, were sitting on the sofas watching a comedy movie and laughing. Among them, munching on a bag of chips, was Len. John's blood turned to ice. He had just seen Len in the top bunk. He had just been yanked out of bed by someone. With trembling legs, he turned and ran back upstairs. He burst into his dark bedroom, his eyes fixed on the top bunk. He took a deep breath, reached up, and tore the blanket away. It wasn't Len. Lying on the pillow, cold and gray, was a single rectangular slab of stone. A tombstone. Someone had shaped it, placed it there, and tucked the blanket around it like a sleeping child. At that same instant, the room was flooded with a nauseating, cloying stench. The smell of decay, of old earth, of a grave that had been pried open. John screamed, a raw, animal sound, and fled. He didn't stop until he crashed into his friends downstairs. It was 3 a.m. They were all trembling, unable to deny it any longer. The house wasn't just creepy. It was haunted. They made a pact to leave immediately. But they were in their underwear and t-shirts, having gone to bed hours ago. It was decided that 2 of them, Babu and Naim, would go back upstairs to grab some clothes and shoes for everyone. They ran up together. The rest waited by the front door, watching the stairs. A minute passed, then 2. Just as John was about to call out, Babu and Naim came tearing back down the stairs, their faces masks of absolute horror. "There are people in the beds," Babu stammered. "We went into the first room, and we saw ourselves. Vak was lying there and Azmi, but they looked wrong. They were gray. They weren't breathing. Naim was hyperventilating. They were the same but not the same. They were copies. Dead copies." Before anyone could process this, Wak, who was staring blankly towards the kitchen, let out a whimper. "Look," he whispered, pointing a shaking finger. In the dark doorway of the kitchen, a small figure was standing. It was a little girl no more than 7 years old. She wore a tattered, soiled dress. Her skin was a mottled pattern of black and white, like a photograph left in the rain. Her eyes were 2 hollow, empty pits, and she had no feet. Her dress simply ended in ragged strips just above her ankles, and she hovered an inch above the floor. Silently, slowly, she raised a small, pale hand and waved at them. A gesture of goodbye. They were petrified, rooted to the spot. They couldn't move, couldn't speak. They just watched as the little girl faded back into the darkness of the kitchen. At 4 a.m., as the first hint of gray touched the sky, they forced themselves back inside, huddling together in one room, too exhausted to run anymore. Vok couldn't sleep. He sat by a window, fiddling with his laptop to calm his nerves. He glanced outside towards the doppelgänger tree. A woman was sitting at the base of the tree. She was wearing a bright yellow sari, but it was ancient, faded, and tattered. Her long black hair covered her face. Vok stared, his heart in his throat. Then she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she began to turn her head. But she didn't turn her face towards him. Her head rotated a full 180 degrees. The hair parted. And Vok saw that her face had been facing him the entire time. Her back had been to him, but her face was already pointing his way, twisted around on her neck. A wide, lipless smile spread across her gray features. Vok screamed, scrambling backwards. He ran for John's room, threw open the door, and crashed head-on into something solid and cold. He fell back, crying out in agony. A searing pain shot through his leg. He looked down. The bone in his thigh was displaced, jutting at a wrong angle. He had collided with a child, the same footless girl who now stood in the doorway staring at him with her empty eyes. Chaos erupted. In the pandemonium, someone realized a terrifying fact. 2 of their friends were missing. Salah and Naim. They weren't in the room. Their phones went straight to voicemail. Then Naim's phone rang back. John answered, his hands shaking, and put it on speaker. For a second there was silence. Then a woman's voice erupted from the speaker. It was not a scream. It was worse. It was a torrent of insane, high-pitched laughter. It was the sound of pure, malevolent glee. The laughter echoed in the room, bouncing off the walls, drilling into their skulls, until John dropped the phone as if it had burned him. They didn't sleep. They prayed when they heard the morning azan, the call to prayer, and as soon as the sun was fully up, they began gathering their things, determined to flee this house of horrors forever. That's when the hospital called. Naim had been found on a road 3 kilometers away. He was barely alive. John and another friend raced to the hospital. What they saw in the emergency room would haunt them forever. Naim was lying on a gurney, his body a mass of bruises and blood. But it was his legs that were unrecognizable. They were crushed, flattened, the bones pulverized into fragments. The doctor's face was grim. "It's as if a heavy vehicle ran over his legs," he said, then backed up and ran over them again. Repeatedly. Before he died, Naim regained consciousness for a single moment. His eyes, wild with terror, found John's. He grabbed John's shirt with a superhuman strength and gasped one final sentence. "Salah? Salah knows everything," he choked out, blood bubbling on his lips. "Ask him." Then he was gone. Salah had vanished. For 6 agonizing hours they searched for him. They finally found him at the back of the bungalow, sitting cross-legged in front of the strange mound of earth. He was in a catatonic state, staring blankly at the dirt, unmoving. He didn't react to his name. He didn't blink. He was like a statue. They dragged him away, abandoning the bungalow and everything in it. Days later, in the sterile safety of a hospital room, Salah finally broke his silence. He confessed everything. On their very first day in the house, he and Naim had been exploring the backyard. Their curiosity got the better of them. They found an old axe in a tool shed and, driven by a bored, destructive impulse, they started digging into the strange mound. Naim was using his feet to kick away the loose soil. They dug down about 2 feet. "What did you find?" John whispered. Salah looked up, his eyes hollow. When Naim's legs were crushed, I understood. It was punishment. That night, they had been walking on a dark, quiet street near the house. There was no sound of an engine, no headlights. Then, out of nowhere, a single car appeared. It didn't swerve. It didn't brake. It headed straight for them. John expected to die. But the car twisted at the last second, hitting only Naim, and then it just sat there, grinding its tires back and forth over his legs. Salah didn't even get a scratch. The car vanished into thin air. It had come for one person and one person only. A few short months later, Salah fell ill. A mysterious, incurable illness. All his medical reports were completely normal. No virus. No infection. No explanation. He just withered away, growing weaker and weaker. 115 days after Naim's death, Salah died too. An official investigation was finally launched. What they uncovered was the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. The land on which the bungalow stood had not always been a residential plot. Decades earlier, it had been an old, disused cemetery. The strange mound in the backyard was not a random pile of dirt, it was all that remained of the cemetery's main gate. When the bungalow was built, the graves were not relocated. They were simply bulldozed, smashed, and built over. The dead were never moved. They were just buried deeper under the foundations of a house full of the living. The locals had always known. They called the place Tanah Perkuburan, ghost ground. They stayed away. Finally, in 2015, after years of standing as a silent, rotting monument to terror, the bungalow was demolished. The walls that had echoed with phantom laughter were torn down. The roof that had sheltered the footless girl was ripped away. Today, all that remains is an empty, overgrown lot, surrounded by a chain-link fence. But the locals will tell you, the land itself is still sick. They say that on quiet, moonless nights, if you are brave or foolish enough to walk past, you can still hear strange sounds from the empty plot. A flush echoing from a bathroom that no longer exists. The faint, high-pitched laughter of a woman. And sometimes, just sometimes, the shadow of a small, footless girl, standing under the ghost of a tree, waving a silent goodbye. Most people in Shah Alam know to simply cross to the other side of the road. They don't look back. And they never, ever go near the spot after dark.